back before Ellis Island, and from what I understand, they went to Quebec, and they did part of that because if you sailed into New York, the ships couldn't carry cargo back to Europe with them, so they had to go back empty. And if they came to Quebec, they could haul things both ways. So the immigrants came in, and other goods went back to Europe. So Ellis Island itself didn't open until early 1900. So these people immigrated earlier than that. And my dad's side of the family left Quebec, and from what I understand, went to somewhere in Houston County, Minnesota, and they didn't settle there, and they moved on from that county. They went down to Forest City, Iowa, and worked there, and then decided to immigrate to, my grandparents and great-grandparents decided to immigrate to what was then Dakota Territory, and they left Iowa, I guess trailing a cow or two, and the whole family. As they got somewhere near the current South Dakota and Iowa line, they probably talked to somebody else, and they told them that there was better land in Minnesota than there was where they were going. So they headed north, and the original homestead of my grandfather was 2 miles north of the Iowa border and a half mile from South Dakota. So, and then they built a sod house there to live in, and started breaking up the prairie to become farmland. Now my mother's family came from the western part of Norway. I forget the name of the town, but some distance north of Trondheim. And the family lived in a place called Auni, and I think that name means something in Norwegian, which I don't understand. I think it was probably not a real productive life there, and there were members of the family who were involved in the merchant, I guess what you call a merchant marine. So they come a variety of things. My mother's maiden name was Christensen, and the Christensens were scholarly people. They lived on a farm not too far from where my grandparents lived, and they had one son who became, he was head of Luther Normal School in Sioux Falls, and later became head of some department at Augustana College. He was kind of a local philosopher, quite often quoted in the Sioux Falls newspaper, the Argus Leader, and they had 2 sons. One became a minister, and the other one became a teacher, taught at the University of Wisconsin. This guy in Augustana was always referred to as CMC, and it's unique in one other respect that his wife had a PhD, and she was a graduate of a number of prestigious schools. She went to Carleton, and I remember her listening at home, and one of her hobbies was making things on a loom. So They lived directly across the street from Augustana College. My mother's side, her grandmother's side of the family, Christensen, when the family emigrated, she stayed behind in Norway for another year because she was in some kind of school over there. And she later joined the family, the Aune family. The Aunes lived in Starbuck, Minnesota. And but she didn't live with them. She lived in Minneapolis for a while and did child care there. And they had a farm southwest of Hector, Minnesota, and that farm was kind of unique, and it had 80 acres on one side of the road and 40 acres on the other side of the road. And they kept the kind of houses for her because my great-grandfather died during the World War II time. He was a diabetic, and in those days, I think he was misdiagnosed. He went to the doctor, they gave him a bottle of pills, supposed to solve all of his problems, but the problem was solved by his death. Now, the area they grew up in around Hector was called Palmyra, and Palmyra Church was about a quarter of a mile from my grandmother's farm. Now, I had a lot of relatives buried in a cemetery out there in Palmyra, and we lived with our grandmother for 2 years back in probably about 1930, and we stayed there for 2 years. And I think my parents had a farm in Wilton County, Minnesota, near a town called Nashua. And I think they never talked about it, but I believe they lost the farm on foreclosure. It was a bad period of time for farmers. And so we moved on to my grandmother's. So they lived there about 2 years. And then through some device or other, we were able to rent by one of my two grandfather's farms. It was a large farm, 240 acres. And we moved there in 1932. And that's where they tried to get me in country school when I was a year younger than I should have been. And so I went to about a week of school in first grade in a country school. And then they came along and said that I was too young to be in school. So I got moved back 1 year. I started the next fall. I went to that school for just a few months. And March 1st was a typical day for renter farmers to move. And we moved to, we started out what was always referred to as the South Place. And we moved on then to my grandparents' homestead. And that was always referred to as the North Place. Then moved there. I started country school. We had to walk about a mile to get there. And I went through country school in 7 years. When I was about in third grade out of school, they moved me ahead 1 grade. And I guess they got a lot of teasing about that, and being a smarty pants, or whatever they called me. And so I talked to the teacher and asked her to put me back original grade, which she did. And I've always been fortunate, I think, in one regard. Had I done that, I probably would have been in World War II in the middle of the real excitement. I went to that country school, 8th grade. I started school in Hills, Minnesota, and there I played basketball, which was the only boys sport we had in school. And I was in a class in 1945, and at the end of the first semester, they were drafting people for the military as soon as you turned 18, and you were almost immediately in the service. So I didn't want to just be drafted and be sent to the Navy or Army or anything. I wanted to be a Marine. So I started, after the first semester, I went to the recruiting office in Sioux Falls, and I went through a series of things at the recruiting office there, and I finally finished all the paperwork, and I was sent off to boot camp in Parris Island, South Carolina, and we were sworn in Omaha, and just before we left, I was given a large envelope, and it had all the details of there were about 8, 9 of us who went down there, and I was supposed to be in charge, make sure everybody got there. It was the first time I'd ever been in some big cities. We went into Chicago, and we had to change trains. And Chicago had a service that ran between the depots, but I was unaware of it, so I think we walked between the depots. And we went on, boarded a sleeping car, went on to spend the night in Cincinnati, and then we boarded a train, went into Kentucky and Georgia, and Franklin Roosevelt died when we were on that trip down to South Carolina, and we were sitting in the train car, and there was a porter in the car came through, tears running down his cheek, and told us that Franklin Roosevelt had died. And then we kept on the journey. We got to Beaufort, South Carolina, and there were a huge number of black young boys there trying to get gifts, I guess. And we moved on to the base itself. The first thing they made us do was clean up the railroad car we were in. We had to mop the floors and things like that. And they put us aboard a truck and drove us out to the base. And
was that
when
the
we got
first
down to
time
the base,
you had saw it?
we got down to the base, and of course there were a lot of other, people who were already stationed there, and they all stand there and say, "You'll be sorry," and then they started getting prepared for the military. We went to what's called the sanitation center, and there they checked people for body lice and any kind of venereal diseases and stuff like that. And then they took us to the barber shop. First guy in a chair, they asked, "Where do you part your hair?" And I think he told them down the middle, and whoever was shaving the heads went right down the middle with the clipper and left a streak. But we all ended up with very short crew cuts, and we weren't issued shoes immediately, and we had a couple of recruits who were from Texas, and they were wearing cowboy boots, and it was kind of funny because we're all trying to march, and they're marching. Those boots are kind of a heel on them. So it was kind of a funny situation. I was finished my boot camp at Paris Island, and while I was in Paris Island, we had D-Day come, and I was out at the rifle range at the base, and they marched all of us into the main part of the camp, and they made a big announcement about the German surrender. Then we got done with our training there. They came along and took all of the tall, big people like myself. I was 6'3", probably weighed, at that time probably weighed 175 pounds. And they assigned us to machine gun school. And so there I learned how to fire the different machine guns the Marine Corps had, how to assemble them and clean them and things like that. Then along comes August, and the atomic bomb, German Japan surrendered, and the instructors we had were almost all big combat veterans. Some had been in Guadalcanal and big famous battles, Iwo Jima, at various places. And they had a point system in the military at that time. And if you had 85 points, you were eligible for immediate discharge. And so we were left without any instructors. Then one day they came along and pulled out a whole bunch of names, and they loaded aboard railway cars, went out to the West Coast and went on to China. They called me and a guy named Peters and Peter's son, and told us that we were on standby, that we'd be on the next group that went out. The next group came along, and they shut them off. They went to China, and there were 3 of us, and I think there were 12 of us that were all in that school. Stayed behind in Camp Lejeune. Then we got orders one day to we were going to go out to the West Coast. We took a troop train out to the West Coast, and we went to Camp Hamilton. I was there for about 2 weeks. Then I got orders to go to Barstow, California, to what was called at that time West Coast Repair Depot. And I spent 3.5 years at Barstow. And Barstow, people may not know, it's out in the Mojave Desert and a very dry climate. So it was a very good place to store stuff. And we had everything from soup to nuts, so to speak, at the base. And there was many supply depot on the West Coast. We didn't store any ammunition there, but that was stored in a even drier climate in Nevada. Then, after that period of time, I got discharged. I still remember the date, April 10th, 1945. Discharged. Came back to Minnesota and spent the summer working on a farm. And I didn't get any particular benefits out of the military. But then in the fall of 1949, I enrolled at what was then called the Mankato State Teachers College. And I went to summer school, so I was able to graduate in 3 years. I left the Mankato where I lived, and moved to Minneapolis. And I got a job. It was the first job I could get and it was at what it was then called Northwestern National Bank, and they put me to work in the controller's department there, and I was there about a year, and one day two friends of mine I'd gone to school with came up, and they were going to be try to get hired by Prudential, who was opening an office in Minneapolis. And so when I got there, I took them to where they wanted to go, and there was a guy in that office said, "Well, why don't you interview too?" So the three of us were all interviewed. I was the one who got the job, and the other two didn't. And I went on there, went to, they sent me to New Jersey for about 6 months to learn the ropes of what I was gonna do. I was hired really to become a supervisor in part of an accounting thing. And I was there, came back to Minneapolis. I lived in a variety of places. And one day I was sitting at my desk, and this young blonde woman came by, and little did I know at the time that would become my wife. Kind of Sandy, she had a girlfriend who worked in or a classmate in Montevideo who worked in accounting, and I guess she came up to see her, but it's the first time I laid my eyes on her. And I don't know, it was sometime later we began dating,